The sun hadn't even thought about rising yet when I stepped into my backyard, gripping the cold handle of my freshly sharpened chainsaw. The air was still and quiet, perfect for what I had planned. I glanced at my phone. 4:59 a.m. One more minute. The world around me was bathed in darkness, save for the dim glow of a single streetlight down the road. My heart pounded in my chest as I inhaled the crisp morning air. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Then, at exactly 5 a.m., I yanked the starter cord. The chainsaw roared to life, shattering the silence like a bomb going off in the middle of a library. The sudden explosion of sound sent birds scattering from nearby trees, their frantic flapping barely audible over the deafening mechanical growl. I could almost hear the collective gasps of my sleeping neighbors as they were wrenched from their dreams by the unmistakable sound of raw defiance. I didn't have to wait long for the first response. Within seconds, porch lights flickered on one by one like fireflies in the night. Windows were thrown open, curtains were yanked aside, and groggy, pajama-clad figures emerged onto their porches with confused and angry expressions. But none of them mattered. I was waiting for one person in particular. Sure enough, there she was, Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, storming out of her house in a leopard print bathrobe, her platinum blonde hair disheveled from sleep. Even in the dim light, I could see the fury burning in her eyes. She didn't walk, she marched, her slippers slapping against the pavement with purpose. I kept the chainsaw running, pretending not to notice her as I dragged a log onto my makeshift sawhorse. The moment Karen reached my property line, she let loose. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, her voice cutting through the stillness like a rusty nail on glass. I turned to her, feigning surprise. "Oh, good morning, Karen. Didn't see you there." Her face was contorted with rage, her nostrils flaring like an angry bull about to charge. "It is 5 o'clock in the morning," she bellowed, arms flailing. "You are waking up the entire neighborhood. Turn that damn thing off this instant." I shrugged, revving the chainsaw slightly. "Sorry, Karen. Just getting an early start on some work. Can't afford to waste daylight, you know." "There is no daylight," she screeched, pointing at the sky as if I hadn't noticed the darkness. I glanced upward, then back at her, keeping my expression neutral. "Huh. So there isn't. But hey, no HOA rules about noise levels before sunrise, right?" Her face turned an impressive shade of red. "This is unacceptable. I will be reporting this to the HOA board." I grinned. "You do that, Karen." She stormed away, her robe billowing behind her like the cape of a vengeful villain. The moment she was gone, I let out a chuckle and continued cutting through the logs, each slice of the chainsaw another act of rebellion against the dictatorship she had imposed over this neighborhood. My chainsaw stunt wasn't just for fun. It was revenge, long overdue, calculated, and well-earned. It all started with my fence. When I bought this house, it came with a sturdy wooden privacy fence that had stood proudly for years. It wasn't an eyesore, it wasn't falling apart, and it certainly wasn't violating any codes. But that didn't matter to Karen. A week after moving in, I received my first official notice from the HOA. According to Karen, my fence didn't align with the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. She insisted it had to go, replaced with something more visually harmonious. I fought back. I read through the HOA rules with a fine-tooth comb, but nowhere did it explicitly prohibit wooden fences. When I pointed this out, Karen smirked and told me, "The board has final discretion on aesthetic matters." In other words, she made the rules as she went along. After weeks of back and forth, including several heated HOA meetings, I was left with no choice. The fines kept piling up, and I couldn't afford a legal battle. I tore down my perfectly good fence, exposing my backyard to the world. Karen, of course, acted like she had just won a war. She even had the audacity to suggest a nice, uniform white picket fence to replace it. I smiled, nodded, and told her I'd think about it. What I was really thinking about was how to make her regret every second of this power trip. Once Karen had a taste of victory, she wasn't about to stop. Within 24 hours of my fence coming down, I received another letter from the HOA. This time, it was about my mailbox. Apparently, my perfectly normal government-issued mailbox was too tall by HOA standards. Never mind that half the mailboxes on the street were the exact same height. Karen had decided mine was a problem. Then came the issue with my lawn. Your grass is slightly off color, the letter read. Please correct immediately. Seriously? Off-color grass? Was I supposed to hand paint each blade? And it didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, I received a constant barrage of petty infractions. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 5 whole minutes after pickup? Violation. My car was parked an inch too far from the curb? Violation. My front porch light bulb was too cool-toned compared to my neighbor's? Another violation. Karen was out for blood, and it was clear she wasn't going to stop until she had either broken me or driven me out of the neighborhood. But she underestimated me. Because while she was busy playing her petty little power games, I was working on a plan that would turn the tables in a way she never saw coming. The more I dug into the HOA rulebook, the more absurd it became. Karen and her minions had created a tangled web of regulations so convoluted that nearly anything could be considered a violation if they felt like enforcing it. I started keeping track of every single notice I received, carefully documenting each ridiculous infraction. I also began talking to my neighbors, and it quickly became clear that I wasn't the only one suffering under Karen's reign. People were fed up but too scared to speak out. That's when I found my golden ticket, a loophole in the rulebook so beautiful it almost brought a tear to my eye. The HOA had countless rules about fences, landscaping, and even the exact shade of paint allowed on front doors, but there was nothing, absolutely nothing, about the use of industrial materials in yard modifications. An idea began to form in my mind. If Karen wanted to play dirty, I was more than happy to return the favor. And that's how the plan for the Great Steel Barricade was born. As the dust settled in the ancient temple ruins, Eleanor and her team stood before the enormous stone door, its surface etched with cryptic symbols that shimmered faintly in the dim torchlight. The air was thick with anticipation. They had followed the clues meticulously, deciphering scrolls, navigating treacherous terrain, and avoiding deadly traps, all in search of this very chamber. Eleanor traced her fingers over the intricate carvings, whispering their meanings to herself. The passage of the forgotten, the guardians of the past. She murmured. Her companion, Dr. Alastair Graves, a seasoned archaeologist with more field experience than anyone present, adjusted his glasses. This script is older than anything we've encountered before, he said, kneeling beside her. After hours of careful analysis, they found the mechanism, a concealed pressure plate hidden beneath centuries of dust. With a deep breath, Eleanor pressed it. A deep rumbling echoed through the chamber, and the door began to slide open, revealing a long-forgotten chamber filled with artifacts untouched by time. The scent of aged parchment and stone filled their nostrils as they stepped inside, the flickering torchlight revealing walls covered in ancient murals depicting the rise and fall of a lost civilization. The room held a massive pedestal at its center, atop which rested a golden artifact pulsating with an otherworldly glow. But before they could celebrate their discovery, a sudden gust of wind extinguished their torches, and an ominous whisper filled the air. Something had been awakened. The temperature in the chamber dropped instantly. Eleanor felt an icy shiver crawl down her spine as the whispers turned into guttural growls, echoing through the chamber. The murals seemed to shift, the painted eyes of long-forgotten figures turning to watch them. A deep rumble vibrated beneath their feet, and then, from the shadows, a colossal figure began to materialize, a guardian of the lost civilization, its form composed of obsidian and energy, its eyes glowing with ancient wrath. It stood at least 10 feet tall, adorned in ceremonial armor, wielding a massive blade that gleamed ominously. The team stepped back instinctively, their breaths caught in their throats. "Nobody move," Alastair whispered, but his words came too late. One of the younger archaeologists, driven by panic, made a dash for the exit. The Guardian reacted instantly. With a single swing of its blade, it sent a shockwave through the chamber, knocking everyone off their feet. The young archaeologist screamed as he was lifted off the ground by an invisible force and flung against the stone wall, unconscious. Eleanor's mind raced. They had read about the legend of the Guardian, but had dismissed it as mere myth. "We need to prove we are not intruders," she said urgently. She reached into her satchel and pulled out an ancient medallion they had recovered earlier. Holding it high, she spoke in the forgotten tongue written on the chamber walls. The Guardian halted, its glowing eyes narrowing. The air remained tense as it tilted its head, seemingly considering her words. The room held its breath. As the team lay motionless, waiting for their fate, the Guardian slowly lowered its blade. Its voice resonated like the grinding of stone. "You carry the mark of the ancients," it acknowledged, its tone no longer filled with malice but with curiosity. Eleanor steadied herself, maintaining her grip on the medallion. "We seek knowledge and understanding," she said, her voice unwavering. "We mean no harm." The Guardian let out a sound that could have been a sigh or a growl. "The path is not given freely. A test must be passed. One of knowledge, one of sacrifice. Choose wisely." The words sent a shiver through Eleanor. They had come prepared for physical trials, but not for choices that could cost lives. The Guardian lifted a hand, and 3 pedestals rose from the ground, each holding an object, a dagger, a scroll, and a vial of shimmering liquid. Alistair studied them carefully. A test of sacrifice, a test of wisdom, and a test of risk. He muttered, "We must choose correctly." Time was against them. The wrong choice could spell doom, but so could hesitation. Eleanor reached for the scroll, believing knowledge was the safest bet. The Guardian watched, silent and still. The moment her fingers touched the ancient parchment, the room began to glow with an eerie blue light. As Eleanor unrolled the scroll, ancient symbols rearranged themselves before her eyes, forming sentences in a language she somehow understood. It spoke of the civilization that had built this temple, a society advanced beyond their years, protectors of sacred knowledge, destroyed by their own hubris. The Guardian nodded solemnly. "You have chosen the path of wisdom. Read and understand." Eleanor continued scanning the text, uncovering secrets that had been lost for millennia. The scroll detailed the location of other hidden chambers, sacred relics that held untapped power, and warnings of those who would misuse them. But then she reached a passage that made her blood run cold. "The one who reads the scroll shall bear the burden of the past. The knowledge shall bind to their soul, and the whispers shall never cease." A sudden searing pain shot through her head. She stumbled, gripping her skull as echoes of voices, memories not her own, flooded her mind. She saw glimpses of a great war, betrayal, the fall of a kingdom. The burden of history pressed upon her, threatening to consume her very being. Alistair caught her before she collapsed. "Eleanor! What's happening?" she gasped, her eyes now glowing faintly like the Guardian's. "I know everything," she whispered. "But I don't know if I can handle it." The chamber began to tremble once more. The Guardian stepped forward, its form dimming as if its duty was fulfilled. "The knowledge has been passed. You must leave this place before it crumbles." The team wasted no time. Supporting Eleanor between them, they rushed toward the exit as the chamber shook violently. Stones fell from the ceiling, dust filled the air, and cracks formed along the ancient walls. The moment they crossed the threshold, the great stone door slammed shut behind them, sealing the chamber forever. Outside, beneath the open sky, Eleanor gasped for breath. The voices in her head had quieted but had not disappeared. Alistair knelt beside her, concern in his eyes. "What did you see?" She looked up at him, her expression one of awe and fear. "Everything we thought we knew. It's just the beginning. There are more temples, more artifacts, more truths buried beneath the sands of time. And I know where to find them." A new determination filled her. This was no longer just about discovery. It was about protecting knowledge from falling into the wrong hands. Their journey was far from over. It had only just begun. As the protagonist and their allies gain ground against their enemies, a shocking betrayal unfolds from within their ranks. A trusted companion, one who had fought beside them in countless battles, reveals their true allegiance. The revelation comes at a crucial moment when the group is on the verge of uncovering a secret that could turn the tide in their favor. The betrayer, driven by personal ambition or coerced by a greater force, sabotages a critical mission, leading to disastrous consequences. The protagonist, blindsided by this act, must grapple with feelings of anger, heartbreak, and guilt for not seeing the signs sooner. The betrayal fractures the unity of the group, sowing seeds of doubt and distrust among the remaining members. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, the protagonist confronts the traitor, seeking answers and possibly redemption. However, the confrontation escalates into a deadly encounter, forcing the protagonist to make a painful decision. This moment not only deepens their internal struggle but also serves as a catalyst for their transformation. They realize that trust is a fragile thing, and from this point forward, they must be more cautious and discerning in whom they confide in. The repercussions of this betrayal extend beyond personal relationships. It alters the course of their mission, forcing them to adapt and rethink their strategies. The enemy, now emboldened by the insider's knowledge, gains an upper hand, pushing the protagonist and their allies into a more vulnerable position. The stakes are higher than ever, and the road ahead is fraught with even greater peril. Reeling from the betrayal and its consequences, the protagonist is forced to seek an alliance with an unlikely group, perhaps former enemies or a faction with conflicting interests. This desperate measure is not taken lightly, as trust has already been shattered within their own ranks. However, necessity outweighs personal grievances, and negotiations begin. The initial meetings are tense, filled with suspicion and veiled threats. Each side demands assurances, knowing that any misstep could lead to devastation. The protagonist, burdened with the weight of leadership, must navigate these treacherous waters with diplomacy and strategic cunning. As both sides reluctantly agree to work together, an uneasy truce is established. However, tensions simmer beneath the surface, threatening to erupt at any moment. The protagonist must play the role of mediator, ensuring that past grudges do not jeopardize the fragile alliance. Through shared hardships and mutual respect forged on the battlefield, some members from both factions begin to see eye to eye. Yet, the lingering fear remains. Will this alliance hold when faced with a true enemy, or will old wounds reopen, leading to inevitable betrayal? With their forces bolstered by the uneasy alliance, the protagonist embarks on a perilous journey through the Forbidden Lands, a treacherous territory that holds the key to their ultimate goal. Legends speak of unspeakable horrors lurking in the shadows, and few who enter ever return. As they venture deeper, the landscape becomes increasingly hostile. The air is thick with an unnatural stillness, broken only by the whispers of unseen entities. The ground beneath their feet shifts, as though the land itself resents their presence. Mysterious ruins hint at a civilization long lost to time, their secrets buried beneath the weight of history. Nightfall brings with it eerie apparitions and haunting visions. Some members of the group begin to succumb to madness, their minds unraveling under the relentless assault of unseen forces. The protagonist must rally their companions, reminding them of their purpose and the stakes at hand. Amidst the danger, they stumble upon an ancient relic, a source of immense power that could turn the tide of their struggle. But with power comes temptation, and not all members of the group are willing to wield it responsibly. Internal conflicts arise once more, threatening to derail their mission. The protagonist must decide who can be trusted with such a powerful artifact and how best to harness its potential without succumbing to its darker influences. As they near their destination, a shocking truth is unveiled. The enemy they had been fighting all along was merely a pawn, a puppet controlled by a far greater and more insidious force. This revelation shatters their previous understanding of the conflict, forcing them to rethink their entire strategy. The true enemy is one they never anticipated, perhaps a forgotten god, a hidden society manipulating events from the shadows, or even an entity from beyond their known world. Their machinations have been in motion for centuries, shaping the course of history to suit their dark purpose. The protagonist and their allies must come to terms with the magnitude of this revelation. Some struggle with feelings of helplessness, realizing that their previous victories were mere illusions. Others see this as an opportunity to strike at the heart of the real enemy before it's too late. However, the enemy is aware of their approach. A trap has been set, and the protagonist finds themselves walking into a carefully orchestrated snare. Their every move has been anticipated, and the true battle is only just beginnings. Just as hope begins to rise, tragedy strikes. A beloved companion, one who has been by the protagonist's side since the beginning, is lost in an unforeseen and devastating event. Whether through a self-sacrificial act, an ambush, or a cruel twist of fate, their death sends shockwaves through the group. Grief threatens to consume the protagonist, their resolve shaken to its core. The weight of leadership, the endless losses, and the burden of responsibility press down upon them with unbearable force. Doubts creep in. Can they truly see this mission through to the end, or is it all for nothing? Their fallen comrades' final words linger, urging them to press forward despite the pain. The loss becomes a defining moment, reshaping the protagonist's motivations and strengthening their resolve. They vow to honor the fallen by completing what they started, no matter the cost. Yet, The enemy wastes no time exploiting their weakness. In the wake of their loss, they launch a relentless assault, seeking to break the protagonist's spirit once and for all. The protagonist must rise above their grief, channeling it into determination rather than despair. The road ahead is darker than ever, but now, more than ever, they understand what is at stake. With renewed purpose, they prepare for the final confrontation, knowing that the fate of everything they hold dear hangs in the balance. As the battle raged on, alliances that once seemed unbreakable began to fracture. The enemy, realizing their impending defeat, played their final card, revealing a traitor within the protagonist's ranks. This betrayal came from an unexpected source, a trusted advisor who had been feeding information to the enemy all along. With the truth unveiled, the protagonist was left reeling, questioning everything they had fought for. The traitor, driven by a misguided sense of justice, claimed they had only sought to balance the scales, believing the protagonist's victory would lead to further oppression. This revelation struck deep, forcing the protagonist to reconsider their approach to leadership and justice. With the battle reaching its climax, the protagonist realized that victory would come at a great cost. The enemy, despite being weakened, still held a devastating weapon capable of annihilating thousands. The only way to stop it was through an act of ultimate sacrifice. One of the protagonist's closest allies, a lifelong friend and comrade, made the fateful decision to give their life to destroy the weapon. Their farewell was brief but poignant, filled with unspoken words of gratitude and sorrow. As they carried out their mission, the protagonist could only watch, feeling the weight of every life saved and the pain of the one lost. The explosion that followed marked both the end of a war and the beginning of an era of change. With the enemy vanquished, the protagonist was left to pick up the pieces. Cities lay in ruins, and countless lives had been lost. The people looked to the protagonist for guidance, for a plan to rebuild what had been destroyed. The traitor, now captured, faced judgment, but rather than executing them, the protagonist chose a different path, one of redemption. They offered the traitor a chance to atone by helping to restore what they had helped destroy. It was a controversial decision, but one that symbolized the new era the protagonist sought to create, one where justice was tempered with mercy. The reconstruction efforts were immense, requiring alliances with former enemies and the mending of fractured relationships. Years passed, and the scars of war began to fade. The protagonist, now a leader not just by title but by the respect of their people, saw the fruits of their labor. A new government was formed, built on the principles of unity and fairness. The protagonist's decisions had shaped the world, creating a legacy that would be remembered for generations. The surviving allies had found their own paths, some choosing to remain and govern, while others sought new adventures. Peace had not come easily, nor was it perfect, but it was real. The protagonist, once a warrior fighting for survival, now stood as a symbol of hope and resilience. Standing atop a hill overlooking the rebuilt city, the protagonist reflected on the journey that had led them here. The battles fought, the sacrifices made, the friends lost and the enemies turned allies, all of it had shaped them into the person they had become. As they looked toward the horizon, they knew that challenges would always arise, but for now, there was peace. And in that moment, they allowed themselves a rare smile, knowing that the story they had written with blood, sweat, and tears had finally reached its conclusion. The sun set on a new era, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, unseen but full of promise.